Some boats fade with time. Grady White became legend. Discover how one small Carolina builder rewrote the rules of boating with innovation, endurance, and craftsmanship so precise, it didn't just raise the standard, it became the standard. This is one of the craziest stories you will ever hear. Before Grady White became a legend among fishermen, it was just two guys with sawdust on their shirts and salt in their veins, Glenn Grady and Don White. In 1959, they set up shop in Greenville, North Carolina, at a time when most small boats were made of wood. Leaks were a personality trait, and every fishing trip came with a prayer. Their idea was simple but bold. Build small boats with the same toughness as the big offshore sport fishers. In other words, let's build tanks that float. The first Grady Whites were handcrafted wooden hulls, heavy, solid, and built to outlive the owners. Local fishermen loved them because they could take a beating from the Atlantic and still bring you home dry. But the real turning point came in 1968, when a young 26-year-old named Eddie Smith bought the company. He didn't just see boats, he saw potential. Smith wanted to build the safest, most reliable fishing boats in America. Not the cheapest, not the flashiest, just the best. It was a philosophy that would define every Grady White hull from then on. What began as a small Carolina boat shop soon became a beacon of craftsmanship and consistency. While other brands chased trends, Grady White chased perfection. And as the story unfolds, you'll see how that obsession didn't just change one company, it changed fishing forever. By the late 1960s, wooden boats were starting to show their age. Literally. They leaked, they warped, and they required more maintenance than a teenager's first car. That's when Grady White made its first bold leap into the future: fiberglass. It wasn't just a material swap, it was a total mindset shift. Fiberglass was lighter, stronger, and didn't rot, basically. It was wood's cooler, low-maintenance cousin who didn't need constant varnish therapy. In 1969, Grady White launched its first fiberglass models, and the difference was instant. Owners no longer had to spend their weekends sanding, sealing, or sweet-talking their boats into staying afloat. Now they could actually do what they bought a boat for: fish. But Eddie Smith wasn't satisfied just swapping materials. He wanted precision, and in 1972, Grady White built one of the most advanced fiberglass manufacturing facilities in the world. Every mold, every panel, every joint was built with surgical care. While other builders were still figuring out how to make fiberglass look pretty, Grady White was focused on how it would handle 6-foot swells, hard turns, and full fishing loads. The result? Boats that felt as stable as docks, even when the sea had other plans. This was the moment Grady White transformed from a small-town builder into an industry innovator, and the rest of the market started paying attention. By the 1980s, Grady White had already earned a reputation for reliability. But Eddie Smith wanted more than solid. He wanted revolutionary. The answer came in the form of a hull design that would redefine offshore boating forever. The CV2 hull. Developed in collaboration with naval architect C. Raymond Hunt Associates, this wasn't just another deep V. It was a continuously variable design, starting with a sharp 20-degree entry at the bow and flattening toward the stern. Translation? Smooth rides in rough water, stability at rest, and handling that made even angry seas feel polite. For serious anglers, it was a game changer. The CV2 hull sliced through chop like a butter knife through Sunday pancakes. You didn't have to fight the boat fought for you. It meant you could go farther offshore, stay out longer, and actually enjoy the ride home instead of bracing for spinal realignment. But Grady White didn't stop at hydrodynamics. They packed these hulls with practical fishing innovations, massive fish boxes, self-bailing decks, cushioned coamings, and layouts designed by people who actually fish. No flashy gimmicks, no fragile chrome, just purpose-built excellence. The CV2 hull became a signature, so much so that when you saw that sharp bow carving through waves, you knew it was a Grady. It wasn't just smoother, safer boating, it was proof that smart engineering could make the ocean itself feel a little less wild. Every legendary brand has its icons, the models that make people stop and stare at the dock. For Grady White, those icons came one after another. In 1977, the Kingfish 254 hit the water. It wasn't just another boat, it was a dare. A small sport fisher that could safely go offshore without shaking itself apart. Nobody thought it was possible, until it was. The Kingfish let weekend anglers chase big game fish in comfort, and suddenly, the line between fishing boat and offshore cruiser started to blur. Then came 1989, and with it, the Marlin 28, a boat so well balanced it became the gold standard for offshore fishing machines. The Marlin wasn't just tough, it was smart. Twin outboards, a deep cockpit, plenty of storage, and Grady's now legendary CV2 hull made it an instant favorite among serious anglers. It handled like a dream, took rough water like a champ, and still offered the kind of comfort that convinced your family it wasn't just Dad's fishing obsession, it was a weekend escape. By the early 2000s, the Express 330 was making headlines. At 33 feet, it was the perfect blend of muscle and manners, crowned Boat of the Year by Boating Magazine. Grady White had achieved something rare, consistency across decades. Each new model didn't just replace the last, it refined it. From the Kingfish to the Express line, Grady White created boats that didn't age, they evolved. And in doing so, they set the benchmark that every other fishing boat manufacturer would spend decades trying to catch. Here's where Grady White really pulled off something genius. They managed to design boats that satisfied hardcore anglers and their reluctant passengers, otherwise known as the family. Before Grady White, most fishing boats were basically floating toolboxes. No shade, but comfort meant a seat that isn't splintered. Grady changed that. They figured out that a happy crew means longer trips, fewer complaints, and way more fish. They started adding details most builders ignored: plush seating, fold-away benches, better lighting, fresh water showers, and even Bluetooth stereos long before it was trendy. And the kicker? None of it came at the cost of fishability. You could still cast freely, wash down the deck, or haul in a marlin without stepping on someone's sun hat. That "built by fishermen" motto wasn't just a tagline, it was the design language. Every cup holder, rod rack, and hatch felt like it was placed there by someone who actually used the boat. And because of that, Grady White became more than a brand, it became a lifestyle. Families who once dreaded Dad's fishing weekends suddenly found themselves on board, loving the comfort and stability. Fishermen stopped having to choose between serious performance and spousal approval. The result? A loyal fan base that spans generations. You don't just buy a Grady White, you inherit one. It's the boat that bridges the gap between hardcore sport and weekend leisure, a perfect mix of salt, sun, and satisfaction. And in doing so, Grady didn't just build better boats, they built better memories. There's a reason Grady White owners talk about their boats like proud parents. The brand didn't just focus on building boats that floated, they built ones that felt right. From the moment you grab the wheel, everything about a Grady feels deliberate. The steering is tight but smooth, the throttle response instant, the hull whispering confidence even when the water's shouting chaos. You don't bounce, you glide, you don't flinch, you grin. That's the Grady difference. Eddie Smith famously said, "Excellence is not an act, it's a habit." And at Grady White, that habit shows up everywhere. Every screw is sealed, every joint reinforced, every hatch lined to shut quietly, because nobody wants their boat to sound like a drawer full of spoons. The company even hand sands the mold edges to ensure glasswork is flawless. It's the kind of obsessive craftsmanship that turns first-time buyers into lifelong fans. Even their customer service became part of boating folklore. If something went wrong, you didn't get corporate runaround, you got real people who actually knew what a bilge pump was. That integrity earned Grady White over 20 consecutive CSI Customer Satisfaction Index awards, an industry record. In a world where many builders cut corners to cut costs, Grady White doubled down on doing things the hard way, the right way. And that dedication didn't just create reliable boats. It created trust, the kind you can feel in every wave, every mile, and every season on the water. No legendary brand sails smooth seas forever, and Grady White was no exception. The boating industry is brutal, fuel prices rise, materials get expensive, and every new fad threatens to capsize tradition. Through recessions, hurricanes, and changing customer tastes, Grady White had to prove one thing over and over again. Quality survives chaos. When the oil crises of the 1970s and 80s hit, people downsized boats or stayed docked. Grady could have cheapened builds to stay competitive, but they didn't. They built smarter. Their boats became more efficient, more hydrodynamic, and better equipped for real-world use. When other manufacturers vanished, Grady stayed afloat, literally and financially. Then came competition. Dozens of brands copied their layouts, marketing themselves as Grady-style boats. But when buyers actually stepped aboard, they could feel the difference. Grady's fit and finish wasn't a gimmick, it was earned. Like comparing a knockoff watch to a Rolex, it looked similar until you felt the craftsmanship. Even hurricanes couldn't knock them down. Based in North Carolina, they rebuilt their facilities stronger after every storm, refining their process instead of pausing it. That resilience became part of their story, a reminder that a Grady White doesn't just survive rough seas, it learns from them. By the time the 2000s rolled around, Grady wasn't just another boat builder, it was a survivor, a benchmark, and a symbol of how doing things the right way pays off even when the tides turn. In every sense, Grady White had earned its sea legs for good. By the 2000s, Grady White had evolved from a Carolina boat shop into something bigger, a dynasty of design, reputation, and loyalty. While other brands jumped on whatever marketing wave was trending, luxury consoles, budget offshore, or weekend cruisers, Grady stayed true to one mission: build the best fishing boats on Earth. And somehow, they made that simplicity feel like luxury. Take the Express 330, the Canyon 336, or the Freedom Series, boats that blended hardcore offshore capability with yacht-like comfort. These weren't the stripped-down workhorses of old. They were finely tuned machines that could take on rough seas one day and family picnics the next. Buyers loved that versatility. You could chase tuna at sunrise and cruise for ice cream by sunset. Few brands managed that balance without losing their soul. Grady did, and their legacy didn't stop with hardware. Eddie Smith turned his success into something bigger, investing heavily in marine conservation and boating safety. He wasn't just building boats, he was preserving the waters they ran on. That environmental ethic became part of the Grady White identity, showing that true craftsmanship means respecting the craft and the ocean. Today, owning a Grady White isn't just about horsepower or hull shape, it's about belonging to a tradition. At every marina, you'll find a quiet brotherhood of Grady owners swapping fishtails and bragging about decades-old boats still running strong. That's not marketing, that's legacy, and it's what keeps the name Grady White legendary. So how did Grady White change fishing boats forever? By refusing to settle. They took the rough, rattling wooden skiffs of the 1950s and turned them into smooth, seaworthy machines that felt like an extension of the ocean itself. They built for fishermen, not focus groups. They engineered boats that didn't just float. They performed, endured, and inspired confidence when the horizon got mean. Eddie Smith's vision still defines every Grady White on the water today. From the sharp precision of the CV2 hull to the unmatched customer loyalty, this brand didn't just set standards, it became the standard. You can trace modern fishing boat design straight back to what Grady pioneered: safety, strength, and usability without sacrificing soul. And maybe that's why, decades later, you'll still see old Grady's cruising past newer boats with half the noise and twice the grace. Because trends fade, but true craftsmanship doesn't. So next time you spot that classic white and navy hull slicing through the chop, remember, you're looking at more than a boat. You're looking at history, tradition, and a promise that started in a small North Carolina shop and conquered the sea. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe because we're not done uncovering legends just yet.